What up guys, GrincherZ's here with a new video. Today I'll be doing a tier list VOD. Now, I've never really been one to subscribe to tier lists just because I think that a lot of what gives a deck in particular power is the ability to pilot it and adapt to certain situations. And that is always going to be true in my opinion. So even if a general is rated, at the bottom of the list, you can definitely come up with a deck list in particular that utilizes this general strength. So I want to just preface this video and the content in it with the notion that you shouldn't take all of it to heart, and more or less this is a general review of how the game has been playing out as a whole. During the last month, we saw Ancient Bonds release, and a lot of cards have pushed the Golem and Arcanist archetype for people, and I think that has done quite a bit to shake up the metagame. It's made a lot of decks appear more viable than they used to be, which is cool. The problem is that, now we have a very clear understanding of who's the strongest and who's the weakest, which more or less kind of puts some people off of playing certain deck types. But with that said, I do want to cover it and make sure that, my opinion is stated here, and I'll try to give a pretty good explanation as to why I think everyone is where they are right now. So, without further ado, let's get started. So first off, we have Fae in Tier 0. Thanks to Ancient Bonds, Fae has risen cleanly to the top. With cards like Circulus and Mana Death Grip, Fae can really push the boundaries of control decks. Vannar is the only faction with true ramp, and being able to stack it in one turn has proven extremely dominant. Now their cheap removal really shines when they have a lot of extra mana to play with, and it doesn't force them to choose between removal and development like other factions. It lets them do both. Like, Fae combines this with her Bloodborne spell Warbird to keep chip damage up throughout the game, and before playing like massive threats that are really hard to deal with. So all this combined with high card advantage without investing much in the way of card draw places Fae neatly at the top of our tier list going into April. And that is covering both like the Arcanist Fae package as well as the Meltdown late game threat package that you've seen other players play. So there's no question she's just at the best right now. With that said, let's roll into number 2. Vath. Magmar got a lot of help this expansion. Lava Slasher became a staple overnight as a go-to 5-drop that nets massive threat production, alongside removal in one. This allows Magmar to make less decisions about holding on to removal versus pushing damage, since the opponent will have to deal with the extra bodies that are on the board. Vath in particular has proven strong across all fronts, as his Overload BBS lets him handle all the small threats while also deterring the opponent from going face. This creates a void of decks that can outpressure Vath, thanks to his plentiful removal options for ranged minions as well, putting Vath as the only other Tier 0 general going into the new season. Now, alongside Lava Slasher, we've also seen Juggernaut become really relevant, which is kind of strange given that it's such a high-cost minion, but since it's so powerful and it requires way too much to answer it, sometimes decks just sneak in a copy or two since they're already running Flash Reincarnation and just flash it out real quick, and the opponent is unable to respond and lose the game. That's not always the case, but it's definitely proven a strategy for some Vath players and gives them a heads up on the ladder over everybody else. Number 3 on the tier list is Cara. The quality of life buff for her Bloodborne spell, alongside all the new Arcanist synergies and new ramp mechanics, really helped Cara rise above her shortcomings. Being able to ramp is a big deal, as it lets Cara's threat production stay ahead of the removal plus development play that your opponent used to be able to do, that kept her down. Lots of strong minions with powerful card retention lets Cara play Duelyst like she used to, just without the same old kinetic hats. Putting her in tier 1 is a no-brainer for me. I've seen a lot of players, for example Mazilji, he's really shown it. I think he finished the season at S rank number 1, playing almost exclusively Cara, which is, pretty impressive considering that she used to be so weak. So I think she's back, and she's definitely a high contender since with all the other Vannar, tools, she's really able to keep up the pace against her opponents. The other surprise on our tier 1 spot is Xerix. Blood of Air has really gone a long way of allowing Xerix to deal with auto-lose situations. If you think of cards like Four Winds Magi, Blood Moon Priestess, Shadow Dancer, those ranged threats that Vitruvian really struggled with in the past, are now a thing of the past. This makes a massive difference for his game plan, as Obelisk Vet can now play very aggressive builds and remove the once unremovables while still maintaining aggression. However, since he is still vulnerable to Magmar and Vanar removal, he's not quite tournament viable, but can definitely perform well on the ladder where opponents can be more varied. Golem synergies prove to be less effective thanks to the RNG from Sirocco, and AoE is crippling, so I'd say Obelisk is the superior strategy. However, he's definitely back on his A game this season. In the number 5 spot we have Zeron. Zeron sort of disappeared from the meta, not getting many new toys from Ancient Bonds, as well as needing to commit a large amount of her deck space to Helionar Shell, makes her rather inflexible, so many people have been playing other things. Golden Vitriol has given her playstyle a bit of a shake-up, with more room to run away. However, her weakness to Vath has become even more apparent this season with his presence, so her overall power level suffers slightly as well. Still, a tier 1 spot cannot be argued for her, as her old tricks are still quite solid. Rounding out our tier 1 section, and then coming in at number 6 this season surprisingly, is Argion. This old guy has had to revert to some of his older tricks, much like Riva, which we'll get to. Slow Nerf hurt Tempo Argion quite a bit, while the prevalence of Vanar decks have made Divine Bond archetypes extremely inconsistent. Nonetheless, the Tempo Argion and a newer Golem Argion may still prove quite solid strategies, since they are still very good at controlling the mid-game, as well as keeping up pressure, just slightly less frequently as before, keeping Argion as the final Tier 1 general. Starting off our Tier 2 section is Riva. She comes in at number 7 on the tier list overall, and her position on the tier list has definitely suffered this expansion. The nerf to Inner Focus hit her consistency quite a bit, and made playing her properly even more difficult. Nonetheless, I am of the opinion that with proper piloting she can contend with even the best decks in the meta. However, thanks to the lack of support this expansion, she's sort of forced to play her older shells, much like Aggro Riva, and playing with different spell high variants like I've seen other players utilize 8 gates and lots of like spear high tactics to overcome the nerfs, but she suffers in terms of raw power, putting her behind everyone else at tier 2, which is unfortunate. Number 8, and second in the tier 2 section, is Starhorn. Starhorn's sort of in a weird spot. He can be as oppressive as Vath, utilizing much of the same strategies, but since he needs to trade cards to be as consistent, his ability to pressure suffers for it. However, he can still utilize Decimus and Tectonic Spikes that gives him quite a bit of a reach, which keeps him relevant and deserves respect in the matchup. However, drawing the opponent cards is still not quite an excuse to play his Bloodborne spell freely, and keeps him from realizing his true potential, thus keeping him in tier 2. Number 9 is Cassiva. It's kind of strange days to be counting Cassiva so far down the tier list. Her problem is she's very predictable these days, and everyone else getting better answers to her threats. It makes her less threatening. Still, when she has a great draw, she can seem unstoppable, curving out Kaleo into Revenant, and if you don't draw the answers, she can just kind of overwhelm you. But I would argue a higher tier position with a better pilot, but as it stands, even her Arcanist builds are somewhat underwhelming, and put her in a tier 2 because of it. In number 10 spot, we have Lilith. She's also the last general in our tier 2 section. She's probably the only general who consistently gets hurt by the prevalence of AoE. Plasma Storm, Frostborn, Tempest, Scorn, all very common cards in the upper tiers, and consistently keep Lilith from doing her thing. Even Vitruvian have an answer to the Blood Moon shenanigans now, which is difficult to address for Lilith players. Arcanist Lilith has proven an excellent tournament deck, however, so I look forward to seeing more iterations next season, and I'm on the lookout for a power shift, but until then she's at the bottom of tier 2, in need of help. Number 11 on the tier list, and the first of our tier 3 section, is Kaleos. Unfortunately, nothing ever seems to help Kaleos. Like, everything he does, Riva seems to do better. I've seen some really cool Hammond decks, and even some EMP-focused decks, where his Bloodborne spell gets these big minions out onto the board and maneuver them without being forced to have mobility cards. However, since those aren't very consistent and cheap removal is everywhere, it doesn't really do a whole lot for him. Hopefully more support comes out soon, as he's barely playable even for the diehard Songhai fans these days. Artifact lists, are generally better in Riva as well, thanks to her Bloodborne spell putting a threat on the board, while if he's by himself, his Bloodborne spell doesn't do anything. So let's hope for better cards in the future. And lastly on our tier list, we have Sasha. Everything she can do, everyone else does better. And that's saying a lot. If you think of Kaleo and Riva doing things better, Sasha has to think, wow, every other general does something better than me. That's rough. They also do it cheaper. With the new toys, she didn't really get much help from the Ancient Bonds, just toys. Blood of Air helps, but doesn't do much to help a general that continuously hurts herself for the sake of tempo, when there isn't really any tempo to be gained because her threats are not that threatening. Sasha's artifacts are too binary and slow for consistent wins, and keep her at the bottom of the tier list once again. I think in the future, if we got more minions that did things like give her artifacts or helped her artifacts while also having decent bodies themselves, she might even become a more recognizable threat. But that said, there's nothing that can really put her above everyone else consistently right now, and thus she suffers a lot for it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, leave a comment, like, subscribe, and you can always find me on my Twitch to ask me questions about certain decks that may be applied in this video or not. So until then, have a good day, guys.